everybody. Welcome to the Film for Fans podcast, the podcast from movie fans for you, movie fans. I am your host, Ryan Dunlevy, and joined by the cartoon pulp fiction shirt wearing Rob Dunham.
Favorite color, favorite shirt. One of the best movies. Can't beat it.
Yes, if you cannot see Rob's shirt, that's because you're not watching on YouTube. Maybe you should be. I don't know. But yeah, two round cartoon figures pointing with the iconic moment of Samuel L. Jackson and John Travolta.
They are oranges. They are oranges, hence the pulp.
They are oranges, yes. That's what they are. That is right. Very nice.
This shirt is like a me joke in shirt form. Fantastic.
Oh, that's great. And our opener is actually kind of about movies, which is rare. So yes, I can't say
this is a movie podcast.
This is a movie podcast, so I can't say it's not. It is. It's a movie podcast.
That's weird.
It is.
I'm feeling uncomfortable.
Because it's a movie podcast, we have an excellent amount of things to talk about related to movies. We will, of course, hit up the box office. We'll break down the numbers a little bit for Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. We'll tell you what's coming out this week, and we'll debate legacy movie franchises, and we'll, of course, talk about Mission Impossible Fallout, the last one preview before this coming week's opener. All right, Rob, let's get into the specifics. Let's get into the numbers with regards to Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny and the box office in general. Indiana Jones finished number 1 in the box office, and these numbers are over the extended 5-day weekend. I pulled those specific numbers, so we're talking Friday night through Tuesday, because Tuesday was Independence Day. Indiana Jones made $83.86 million to take home the top box office slots. Elemental in its third week did $18 million, about $95 million total for that particular film. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse still keeping up with $17 million. It's kind of parked in around that 15-17 mark for a number of weeks now. That's good pull for still being out 5 weeks. Sound of Freedom, the numbers are a little skewed for Sound of Freedom because it was only out for 1 day, but still pulled in $14 million. A lot of those were pre-sales because they sold a lot of tickets pre-sale, but it was very, very good numbers for Sound of Freedom. And No Hard Feelings came in top 5 with $11 million. So good numbers overall. Now, of course, you have 2 extra days to acquire those numbers, but very good numbers overall for the box office as a whole for the July 4th weekend. Any non-Indiana Jones thoughts before we jump into that?
Yeah, I think Sound of Freedom, it's made by Angel Studios, which is a widely known Christian studio. And that they and Flywheel, some of these other studios that do Christian movies, have been known for this kind of tactic, I guess you want to call it, where they will sell a bunch of tickets ahead of time to like church groups or ministry organizations or whatever. So I would expect that number to take a pretty significant drop beyond that opening day. But still, it's pretty impressive to generate that amount of money in 1 day for a movie that I didn't really see much about, like in the theater. I don't recall seeing a trailer for this movie, and I go to a lot of movies.
I've seen a couple of trailers. I don't remember exactly where I saw the trailers, but I remember seeing a few trailers for it. We'll talk about that in a moment because I'm including that in this week's segment for what's coming out in the box office, just because it came out on a Tuesday. So I'm including it in this week's box office. I thought overall it seemed like the box office had a pretty good week. But now let's get into the numbers for Indiana Jones. 83 million on its 5-day extended release. What do you make of that number? I'll give you an initial shot, and then we'll give maybe give a few little background info.
Yeah, so breaking into this, I don't know if this is any of what you're going to say, but I looked at a little deeper at the numbers here, and this movie made about 4 times more per screen where it was showing than any other movie that was out. So it was by far the most popular movie in every theater it was in. If you look at the number $83 million at face value, you think that's a really good number. Compare it to The Flash. What did The Flash come in at 55? And this movie almost made that and a half. However, when you look a little deeper into things and see that the budget for this movie was $295 million, it makes the $83 million not look so great.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this has to, my general thought is I think this has to be looked at as disappointing, not a flop, but very disappointing. I mean, that is one of the largest budgets for a movie I've seen in recent times. And having watched the movie, I don't understand why it cost that much.
I had the same thought. I saw that number and I thought the only thing I could see in this movie that would have cost a significant amount of money would have been like the de-aging process on Harrison Ford.
Yeah.
For the CGI. So it has to be like a lot of it must be Harrison Ford's salary for the movie.
I don't
watching this movie, like one of the things that stuck out to me, I don't know about you, but one of the things that stuck out to me made me think this is like classic Indiana Jones, was that it didn't feel like it was an expensively made movie.
Yeah,
in a good way.
Yeah, it didn't feel like you had this massive CGI budget that was, where you're having like 400 or 500 different CGI shots. Now, I don't know exactly how much CGI they used. I mean, obviously they used a good amount on the de-aging. But yeah, it didn't feel like you had all this CGI and all these visual effects trumping everything. I mean, you can get, we've been talking about the Mission Impossibles. Most of those have like $150 million budget. So, I mean, this is almost double the budget of what your standard Mission Impossible movie has. And I don't know where the money went. I mean, it might be something we look into, but you have to. Go ahead.
This is almost $300 million before marketing. Like this is just the production budget. Yeah. This is just what it cost to make the movie.
And they marketed this thing like crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. That in contrast to Sound of Freedom, I think I saw the Indiana Jones trailer in almost every movie I went to.
Yeah.
For like a month, and that included horror movies, that included kids animated movies, that included just regular action movies. It was in every movie.
I heard this trailer before. Advertised on podcasts, like podcasts that I listened to were running Indiana Jones ads. So, yeah, so I think it has to be considered a very to quite disappointing the turnout on this. I'm sure it will make back its money for sure because the international pool will come in. I mean, it will clear budget, I think, but yeah, I think it has to be disappointing. Just for context here, the weekend itself, it only made $60 million. Now, you can also, I mean, that's one of the reasons why the 5-day kind of makes more sense to go with, because there'd be a lot of people who's like, oh, I'll go see it when I'm off on Tuesday. So people who might have gone to see it on the weekend didn't, because they knew they have another chance. So the numbers are, but 60 million on its opening weekend. If you had just looked at that number, you're like, holy cow, that's terrible. In contrast, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which Rob semi refuses to believe actually exists, did 100 million on its opening weekend. And that was not a holiday weekend.
Like, very hard to believe right now.
Yeah.
Like and I think the failure of that movie is a big reason why this movie suffered, because I think a lot of people didn't trust it.
I think you're right in that I have several things on that, but I want to save them a little bit for our discussion item, because I want to get into that thing a little bit more. Um, it will be interesting to see what the box office does in the next week, because a lot of people went to see it. We've talked about this regularly. The normal expected drop off is 50 is basically 55% for a movie in its second week of release. We'll see what the numbers do this weekend, and where that will stand to tell us whether people who went and saw the movie and liked it are telling other people. And yeah, we'll see what
I
happens.
mean, the the one thing that's going well for it, and I'm sure we'll talk about this shortly, is that there's not a whole lot of competition this weekend
No, there is not.
for it. But so I do like to go see movies multiple times if I really like them.
Mhm.
Having the Regal subscription really helps with that, because I don't have to worry about spending extra money to do that.
Yep.
And if I really really love a movie, I want other people who I know like movies to go see the movie, so I'll go with them to see the movie.
Mhm.
And although I liked Indiana Jones, I don't. It's not the kind of movie that I would necessarily like. I don't really feel inclined to have someone else go watch it with me. Like, it was good, but I was thinking about it a little bit more after we broke it down, and like, if I'm being honest, it would have to rank like 3 or 4 in the 4 Indiana Jones movies beyond the
Mhm.
other one. Um, like, it's not a top one.
Yeah,
I mean, it was a good movie, but I don't think it was great.
I would probably put
So
it
I
in
don't.
number three for me.
Yeah, I don't really think it's gonna. I don't really think it's. I don't know. I think it's in danger of possibly having a pretty significant drop off
Yeah,
in the second week.
yeah, we'll see. We'll see for sure. But I think yeah, I just think they have to be feel a sense of disappointment. I mean, this is a major holiday weekend. Um, and this is a major film with not a lot of competition, because everything else had been out. Everything else in the top five had been out multiple weeks, except for No Hard Feelings, which is only in its second week, but they're not in the same genre or the same class on that front. Um, so yeah, I think the feeling has to be disappointment, but we'll see. We'll see what
Yeah,
happens.
like I said, it's interesting because it dominated the box office. Like, the numbers say that 4 times as many people went to see it as any other movie
Yeah,
that was out, but still, that was probably not enough.
yeah, yeah. All right, so let's talk about the three movies, well, two and a half movies that are coming out this week. Um, the first one is Joyride, and Joyride is a comedy, and it's the plot is it follows four Chinese American friends as they bond and discover the truth of what it means to know and love who you are while they travel through China in search of one of their birth mothers. This one stars Debbie Fan, Kenny Liu, Annie Mumolo. I'm probably saying that wrong terribly, and David Denman. Um, so this is kind of a raunchy female comedy. I think in kind of the vein of Bridesmaids, as one of the comparisons we're seeing on that front. Another one is Insidious, The Red Door. Now, this, of course, is the second or third Insidious movie. I feel like it's the
I think it might
third.
be the third. I'm not positive on that though. I haven't seen
Yeah,
the others, so
Insidious, The Red Door. The Lamberts must go deeper into the further than ever before to put their demons to rest once and for all. And this stars Ty Simpkins, Patrick Wilson, Rose Byrne, Sinclair Daniel. So this is the next installment of that horror franchise. And I'm including Sound of Freedom, one, because we didn't talk about box office releases last week, and because it only came out on Tuesday. Um, but this movie is the incredible true story of a former government agent turned vigilante who embarks on a dangerous mission to rescue hundreds of children from sex traffickers. And this movie stars Jim Caviezel, Mira Sorvino, Bill Camp, and Jose Zuniga. So it's got a pretty good cast along with it. And that one, like I said, came out on Tuesday. What do you make of the box office entrance?
Well, Sound of Freedom, that description makes it really sound like a very special person of interest episode.
Hey, if that's what it's
That's
like,
literally
I'm
what
all here
Jimmy
for it.
is in person of interest, a former
Yeah.
government agent who is now a vigilante. So, yeah, interesting. I wonder if it takes place in the same universe. Actually, this is supposed to be a true story.
It is supposed to
So,
be.
I'm intrigued by Insidious, but I haven't seen the other one or two, whatever it is. So I don't think I'm going to go see it in the theater because I would want to see the others first in case I need to see them to understand it. Which it sounds like, based on the description, you probably would want to see the other first before you see this one. Joyride, not really interested in.
Yep.
Although, yeah, I do think it is a pretty interesting and probably beneficial thing that we are seeing the growth of like Chinese American cinema, Japanese American cinema. We've seen this, even Korean American cinema. We've seen this in several movies that have come out over the last few years. So I think the more you can broaden the spectrum of the kinds of stories that are being sold, the better it'll be overall for the movie industry. Now, whether to say this contributes to that in any meaningful way, I can't say. But I know that I'm not super interested in going to see it.
Yeah.
Those are my thoughts coming out. So I would say that I it's funny because today on the way home I was actually looking at, what might I go see if I was going to watch a movie on the way home, and nothing appealed to me enough to actually go to the theater. And all these movies are in the theater, so I think that pretty much tells me that I might not see any of them.
Yeah, this is a slight preview, but I hadn't seen Asteroid City, so that's what I did this afternoon.
Nice.
So I had an option. Otherwise, I'd have been in the same boat as you are. Yeah, the only one I would have any interest in Sound of Freedom. I'm not a huge fan of raunchy comedies. I'm really not a huge fan of female raunchy comedies. Yeah, doesn't interest me. So Sound of Freedom would be the one I would go to if I would go to that, but I don't know if I will go see it. We'll see. We'll see how the week plays out. But that's what's in the box office this week. Plus, you can go to Indiana Jones. Make sure you check out our last episode of Film for Fans, where we do an instant reaction breakdown of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, if you're interested in hearing that. But now we'll move on to our discussion. And the first discussion element is kind of in line with what happened with Indiana Jones. We talked about it not making the money that I think the studio would have anticipated. We've also seen this be a regular occurrence for DC. All of their movies over the past year have not done well. All of the Marvel movies over the last year plus have not been particularly well received. You saw the latest Transformers movie was not particularly well received from the box office numbers standpoint. So my question is, have moviegoers soured on big legacy franchise movies? So there's kind of a lean in that question. But my mind immediately goes to, okay, is it a chicken and the egg thing? Is it that people are no longer interested, or is it that the film's quality has decreased and therefore people are not interested? Or what do you make of this idea? Do you think there's a trend here with big legacy franchises and disappointing box office results?
So my answer to the chicken or the egg question is yes. Both.
Okay.
So there have been a couple, like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, Spider-Man, No Way Home. Those did pretty good.
Spider-Man No Way Home was like almost 2 years ago now.
Yeah. But beyond that, like there hasn't been a whole lot when it comes to movies that are coming out following in the vein of other movies. The other recent one I can think of that was a good movie, and I honestly don't remember how well it did in the box office. It did okay, I think, but not great. Was Ghostbusters Afterlife, which I believe they're making another one. But that movie was like the. Go ahead.
That movie was 2021.
Okay, so that was a little while ago still.
Yeah, November
And
2021.
that tells you all you need to know about these legacy movies. That's like the most recent one that pops into my mind as being worthwhile.
Yeah, and that
A
followed
lot
on
of
the heels of a very disappointing sequel itself.
yeah, I mean the breakout movies like Everything Everywhere All at Once. Most of them have gone against this trend of recycling things. However, one of the most successful movies the last couple of years, Top Gun Maverick, was a legacy movie.
There was.
So it's not impossible for a movie like this to succeed, but there's so much that has to be done right. And most of the movies that are coming out like this are not done right.
Yeah. My thought is this. I think you can put it really in pre-Endgame, post-Endgame. I think after the investment of 15 plus years in the Marvel universe, people are ready for that to be done, you know? And I think that getting to that finish line did create a level of fatigue. And people finally got it was worth it. That journey was worth it, but then the energy it sucked out of the moviegoers along the way. I think there is a sense of fatigue with some of these big legacy franchises. Now you combine that with the fact that the films that have been delivered have seemed to just be coasting. It seems like they're counting on, well, because it's this, people will come out. Because it's this, people will come out. And people aren't. People aren't coming out. And I think there is a sense where people are ready for something different. They're ready for something different. Now, if the exceptions to this rule happen to be very, very well made movies, you mentioned Spider-Man, No Way Home, and Top Gun Maverick. Those were two extremely well done movies. And I think people are sophisticated enough now when it comes to their movie going that they can tell. They can tell from the trailers. They can tell from how it's doing. They can tell from the buzz around the movies whether or not it's well done. And as movie sophistication grows, and I think this might be in part of what's the right word? The movietization of TV. As you're seeing the quality of TV go up, I think you're seeing a more sophisticated movie audience. Now, you might also say, yeah, but then they don't support some of the indie movies that are well done. That's still an issue. But I think people are being much more discerning on some of these legacy franchise movies. And they're not just a guaranteed box office cash cow anymore. And the studios are going to have to try harder.
Unless your name is James Cameron, in which case you can just smack the name Avatar on something and it'll make $2 billion.
It still bothers me. It wasn't that good. I'm sorry. It just wasn't. It wasn't worth the amount of box office revenue that it got. That bugs me.
I watched it again this week on Disney Plus, and it's a gorgeous movie. It really is.
It is. It's visually fascinating.
It's not really anything beyond. It's really not.
Yeah,
and that's. I mean, the same could have been said of the first Avatar. Also,
yeah. So, but I give the first one a pass because it caught the wave of 3D and ushered into a new place that it hadn't gone before. So I give it some credit for that. I don't, I, but this is not about Avatar and my dislike of The Way of Water. Um,
This is not an Avatar hate podcast.
no, but maybe it should be. I don't know.
I mean, one other note I have is that some comic book movies have succeeded, and when they succeed, it's because they're doing something unique or different, like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. That's a brand that people enjoy because it's funny, it's different, it's not serious comic book movie.
Yeah.
Same thing with Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse.
Yeah.
It's done very well because people went in expecting something to be stunning visually and delivered.
Yeah.
And people continue to go see it. So they can succeed, but it's a matter of them doing something unique.
And I think Thor Love and Thunder was a real downer because I think like everyone really wanted that movie. They really wanted to like it. And just it didn't deliver because after everyone raved about Thor Ragnarok and it had that franchise in a really good place. And then Thor Love and Thunder. And it just yeah. So I think it's the combination of discerning moviegoers and studios putting out a bunch of meh movies.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those factors, along with how poorly Kingdom of the Crystal Skull has aged, or not even aged, was received, slash it has the reception of it has not gotten better over the years. That has hurt Indiana Jones. Okay, so let's move on and let's get to our revisiting of Mission Impossible Fallout. So this is the last installment of our review series on the Mission Impossible movies, and so this means that we are coming up very, very close to our release of Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning, which comes out next week, which we will have more on for sure. And so let's begin with our basic stats about the movie, and then we'll talk about some background info, plot summary, observations, strengths of it, all that good stuff. So first off, this movie was released on July 27th, 2018. Along with it, it had an estimated budget of $178 million. On its opening weekend, it did $61 million. It had a domestic gross of $220 million and a worldwide gross of $791 million. So huge, especially internationally. These movies have have blown up internationally. They're hugely popular, but 220 million is not bad domestically either. What was interesting to me as a side note about all these movies and their franchises, I feel like these are like monumental mammoth movies box office wise. And they're just like, they just have quite good numbers. They're not like unbelievable box office blockbusters. They're just really good box office results. So that kind of surprised me a little bit. So that's where we got the box office. Now the cast itself comes in. You have, of course, Tom Cruise. You have Henry Cavill makes his first appearance and only appearance in the franchise as Agent Walker. Ving Rhames is back. Simon Pegg is back. Rebecca Ferguson is back. Sean Harris is back. So this one has the most repeat cast of any of the films. Angela Bassett makes an appearance, as does Vanessa Kirby. Michelle Monaghan is also back. So that is fun. The basic plot of the movie is Ethan Hunt and his IMF team, along with some familiar allies, race against time after a mission gone wrong. So a little bit of background on this. Cruise decided to approach Chris McQuarrie about directing this one again. And McQuarrie would have been the first repeat director in the entire history of the franchise. And he wasn't sure he wanted to take that on, but he finally agreed to do this Mission Impossible if he could do one thing, and that would be to direct it in a very different style than he directed the previous one. And so he replaced most of his back cast, his back production crews, cinematographer, a lot of his production people. He replaced just so the whole thing would have a different feel and feel like a different movie, even if it was done by the same director and writer. So Chris McQuarrie agreed. And one of the things that he went to Cruise about, he says, okay, if there's one thing you want to do with this movie, what do you want to do? And Cruise told him, I want to tie up the story between Ethan and Julia. And so that right there, of course, Julia being his wife from the third movie, who then makes a very brief cameo in the fourth movie and then kind of disappears. And it's kind of been left out in the ether, hanging throughout the franchise. So Tom Cruise insisted this is the one thing he wanted to do. He wanted to wrap up and tie up that story. And so that became the impetus for what they decided to do in this movie. So let's start with some observations. Rob, what are some of your observations about this movie as you watched it?
I think that it was a pretty good idea to bring back the villain character. I think that there's an argument between him and Philip Seymour Hoffman's character as to the best villain in the series is, but I think he's the best. Personally, that's my personal opinion. Sean Harris is the best.
Good job.
Yeah. It does feel like a different movie, like you said. For sure, there's just a different feel, different vibe to the whole thing. But there's still Tom Cruise doing crazy Tom Cruise things like hanging off of a helicopter, flying through, flying through the wall, just insane things, insane Tom Cruise things. But yeah, I did appreciate that they went back, revisited, and tied up the storyline between him and the wife, because I don't know if it was absolutely necessary for them to do that, but it makes sense for them to do that. So, and again, further cements the idea of Tom Cruise's general movie acumen when it comes to storytelling.
Yeah.
That he has a pretty good idea of what audiences or fans would like to see happen and how to make that come across in a genuine way that doesn't feel overwrought or cheesy. And I felt like he did that very well in this movie.
Yeah, for sure. Some of my observations were this movie felt more philosophical than a lot of the other Mission movies. There was Ethan's philosophy, there was Lane's philosophy. They were really stretching the characters, really putting the characters in uncomfortable situations where they were having to make choices. And so you were really getting a sense of ethos and a sense of ethics throughout the entire movie in a way that you haven't gotten in a lot of the other movies. So from that standpoint, I do feel like it was more philosophical in nature than some of the other ones. They have in the background, they've been trying for several movies to create what they call a mousetrap scene, and they finally came up with one for this one, and that was the CNN news broadcast thing with Wolf Blitzer. One of the things that struck out to me the last time I watched this that I really didn't take into account was how dark the opening of this movie is. It's incredible for a Mission Impossible movie. The opening is incredibly dark, right up to the point where those walls drop out of that hospital room, where because as the audience, the first time you watch it, you don't necessarily know that the nuclear bombs didn't blow up these landmark sites, other than to say like that's really far out for a Mission movie. But then the moment those walls fall down and you see the whole thing was a gag, like it's like, okay, now we're back in. Now we're in a mission movie. Now
Yeah.
this all makes sense. But up to that point, it was incredibly dark. Um, so that's one thing that struck me as I watched it. Um, and I loved how the cold open was kind of his dream sequence where he's getting married to Julia, and there's Lane uh
Hmm.
changing the vows, as it were. And I like that because it lets you know right off the bat, okay, we're going to come back to this. Like, this is going to be a main theme to this movie. And especially
Hmm.
since that was one of the drivers of it when they originally started, I thought that was cool. Um, this was, I think, the only Mission Impossible movie that had its biggest action sequence actually at the end of the movie.
Hmm.
Almost every other Mission Impossible sequence is like the biggest or the most well-known action sequences are all like in the middle of the movie. or even some of them towards the beginning. This is the only one that actually managed to put the biggest action sequence at the end of the movie. So that was kind of interesting. The other thing, tonally, I thought this one had the best blend of moving from action sequences to dialogue sequences back to action sequences. It flowed so seamlessly that the action sequences almost like melded in to the rest of the story. So it almost makes it seem like they're not as big as they are, or not as difficult as they are,
Hmm.
because they just blend so well with the rest of the movie. Um, Whereas just by the nature of how they shoot them, where they start with the action sequence and figure out the story, there does tend to be like dialogue, now big action, now back to
Yeah.
dialogue, now big action. This one had a much more seamless feel as it went through than some of
Yeah. I
the other
think
ones.
in particular, you bringing that up makes me think of the scene where they crash into the armored car and knock it into the river and go retrieve his body. Like, now that you're mentioning that, in a lot of movies that could be like this huge, massive, like, action thing, and this movie is just kind of like, this needs to happen in order to keep things going. It didn't feel like a big deal, even though they saved a guy from drowning
Yeah.
out of an armored car. Like, it's a pretty big deal.
The biggest one for me was the halo jump. Like, that halo jump was incredibly difficult. I'm going to give some stats on it later, but it was unbelievably big action sequence and incredibly difficult stunt. It feels like it just blends into the flow of the movie. So I mean, you could criticize that and say, like, you put all this effort in these scenes and they don't pop the way it is. But I actually
Mm.
think that means that the movie is so cohesive that it flows along with it, and and just the connections and the flows between the different sequences work so well that it all just kind of runs in one direction like a river. So strengths. What do you think the strengths of Fallout are?
Um, I said earlier the incorporation of Solomon Lane's character.
Mm-hmm.
I think very well done. Um, I like how they have him. I like how they utilize him, because you're questioning as it goes through the movie if he's the mastermind or if he's being the a puppet, and
Mm-hmm.
it kind of goes back and forth a few times,
Yeah.
and you're not really sure if he's really this terror leader bad guy that or if he's just being used by somebody else. And I think that where they land on that is the right way to do it. Um, and for me, that's why he's the best bad guy in the series. What's funny is, for all the bluster of Henry Cavill's character, he's not a Superman. He's an okay man in this movie,
They
as far as
apparently, like,
bad guys go.
watching the background on this was so funny because they were constantly harassing Henry Cavill about being Superman. Uh, the scene where they're all riding around in the back of this little car, uh, because they would run through the maze in this and then have to do it again, so they'd all ride back. Henry Cavill got tired of sitting in his car with all these guys in the back seat, and so he just started running
Mm.
back to the starting block. And as they're driving back in the car, like Simon Pegg would start humming the Superman theme next to him, and it'd pull up next to him. They were just constantly doing that to him the whole time.
I really liked you just mentioned, but I continue to enjoy the evolution and more responsibility given to Simon Pegg's character in the series. I think he does a great job in that role. Absolutely. And his ability to finally get the mask. Finally get the mask.
Finally got the mask. Yep.
And the fact that he played it just so well. Obviously that's in real life. That's Sean Harris sitting there acting like he's not himself. Yeah. But still, like the way they did it, it felt like it was Benji doing it. It felt genuine. I'll talk about this a little bit, and the weaknesses maybe was telegraphed a little bit. But I do really like his character and was glad to see him get more of a role, some more emotional weight when it came to the scene where they were with the apostles trying to make the exchange. He had more of an emotional, meaningful part in that, and I think carried some like responsibility and weight because of that throughout the movie.
Yeah,
which I think added some meaningfulness to his character and was not cheap and didn't distract from what they were trying to do with his character.
I agree. Yeah. Some things I liked. The interplay between Ethan Hunt and Vanessa Kirby's White Widow was really, really well done. It was very much that half flirtatious, half dangerous, like, and so much of it's played with their visual looks back and forth, where you can Vanessa Kirby will look at him and you can tell she's intrigued and playful, comfortable, doesn't believe him, but kind of believes him. So it's a really, really fascinating interplay. And especially the moment when, I think it was something about like, well, you're comfortable with murder, right? And he'd be like, yes, of course, I'm going to gas all these people. And you could like, he can't quite deliver that convincingly. And she picks up on it, but she's like, let's see where this goes. And so that interplay was really cool. Another storyline thing that I really liked the strength was how they showed you that John Lark was actually Henry Cavill's character. And they did it just by showing you, they show you in the bathroom fight scene that the supposed Lark's phone is actually broken. And then when Henry Cavill hands it to Angela Bassett's character, it's a non-broken phone screen. So he's handing her a false phone. And so that's kind of how they reveal that Henry Cavill's the bad guy. And it's not hidden, but it's subtle enough that if you're not paying attention, you might miss it. And I like that. I think it's cool. He's not hiding the ball from you, but he's giving you a little bit to see if you're paying attention. Another strength I like is the continuation of the relationship between Ethan and Elsa. And this is where, I mean, the most common franchise that Mission Impossible gets compared to is Bond. They're a little bit boring, but a lot of James Bond. And this is where it is the anti-James Bond. In James Bond, the girl he's interested in, they're having sex like 5 minutes after they meet each other. Basically every movie. These two characters have this building romance that has lasted over 2 full movies, and you've never even seen an on-scene kiss for them. And yet you absolutely sense how much they care about each other. I think that's fantastically well done. And you're seeing that escalate even more in this movie.
Yeah, I would say the only time in James Bond we've really seen anything like that has been the most recent Daniel Craig movies.
Yeah.
Where he said some of the same love interests carry over or become more serious in the movie themselves.
And they have done a little better in the Daniel Craig versions. Casino Royale had like a legitimate love story on that front, but even still, they haven't carried it out quite like this. And yeah, it's different. Some people don't like that, but it's different, and I think it's different in a good way. The lighting in this throughout the entire movie is just off the charts. The lighting is just ridiculously well done. In particular, that the scene when he's hanging off the cliff at the end, oh, it's so well done. Vanessa Kirby is a strength. I mentioned it already, but the way she acts, not only with her lines, but with her eyes and her tones and her facial expressions. Chris McQuarrie, by far of any of the directors of Mission Impossible, has brought in incredibly interesting, dynamic female characters. And I love that there were actually consequences to the positions that Ethan was taking and the way he was doing things. There were actual consequences for how he was acting. Like he doesn't want to kill the cop that they stumble across. So as a result of not wanting to kill the cop that he stumbles across, he ends up having to shoot 4 other people.
Mm-hmm.
So there's actual consequences for him doing what he's doing and how things are going. And I thought that was really well done. Weaknesses.
So you did mention that his strength was like in the physical action of presenting who John Lark was, but like one of the things that I thought was maybe a weakness, and I don't know if it's necessarily the fault of Chris McQuarrie, Tom Cruise, or anyone involved in the movie, because it's just a numbers game. That when you hear that there's this John Lark character, and they try and misdirect you a little bit to suggest it's Ethan, but I don't think anyone who has watched the other movies would buy that it's Ethan. So if it's not him, who else would it be other than Henry Cavill's character?
Yeah.
So to me, when he like turns Tom Cruise in or makes a suggestion to Angela Bassett's character, like from that point on, like the first time I saw the movie, from that point on, I knew it was going to be him.
Yeah.
Now the question is there anything they could have done to camouflage that based on how the movie went? And I don't know if there is. So I don't know if that's really, like, I don't know if it's fair to call that a weakness, because that's just maybe a casualty of how this kind of movie is made.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's a number game. Like there's nobody else who's going to be that person.
Yeah.
In my opinion, unless they introduce someone way late in the movie, which would probably feel like Deus Ex Machina and cheap.
Yeah.
And I don't think they want to do that. The only thing that could have really surprised me if it did, what would have been if it had actually ended up being Tom Cruise's Ethan Hunt character.
That would have been surprising.
But I think they've built up so much goodwill in that character that they were not willing to go there. I am kind of interested or curious if like that was ever even a thought in anyone's mind that they might go that direction, because I think it would have been fascinating.
Yeah.
But I don't know what it would have done to the series if you would have done that. I mean, Henry Cavill's character is very much set up as, and it's not his fault at all. It's how the movie is. He's a paper tiger. And that's a very hard role to play and come across as being effective and genuine.
Yeah.
I think he probably did the best you could do with that kind of character, but that kind of character in general is just a hard one to pull off.
Yeah.
Really in any. So like very rarely have you seen that succeed. What one of the ones I can kind of think of, and this is a complete like going way far afield here, but Snape from the Harry Potter movies in a lot of ways is a paper tiger. He's playing one thing and it turns out he's something completely different.
Yeah.
But they do such a good, and they have the benefit of building that up over so many movies, that when it's finally revealed what's going on, there's a huge emotional impact to that. And you just can't build that kind of feeling in one movie when the guy's only going to be in one movie.
Yeah.
So like throughout, even though I said there were the twists and turns of like who's really the bad guy, who's really the big bad guy, like to me, I never really believed it was going to be Henry Cavill's character. And I don't. What are your thoughts on that? Do you blame like any specific aspect of how the movie was made for that? Do you even think it's a problem?
I go back and forth on it. You're not wrong in what you're saying. One of McQuarrie's things is if like rather than constantly trying to hide things from people, let's just tell them. So I think like that scene you're referring to when he's trying to turn in Tom Cruise is also the scene where he hands over the phone that isn't broken.
Yeah.
So in a way, I think Chris McQuarrie is coming out and telling you, okay, now I'm going to tell you who the bad guy is. Like, I think he's doing that intentionally. I think he intends for you to know at that moment. Now, does that negatively affect the story that you know that he's the bad guy and it's not a big reveal later? I don't know. I don't know. I can see how some people wouldn't like it. Um, I don't know. So I would say I don't know that it's a weakness, but it does mean that your quote villain character, um, and there are kind of multiple villains running around in this one, um, may not be as ultimately strong as you think.
Mhm.
There's not as big of a pain of the betrayal, as it were, as a result.
I did appreciate. This is going back a little bit to maybe a subtle strength, but um, there was a little more nuance in Alec Baldwin's character as a secretary
Yeah.
in this movie. I felt really served the progression of the movie well,
Yeah.
because I think out of all of my opinion, I think out of all the characters in the movie, he's the one whose motivations and ultimate decisions were hardest to pin down.
Yeah.
Because I think he's shown both sides of that character in the movies leading up to this. So you weren't really sure exactly whose side he was on.
Yeah.
Or where he was going to go. I was pretty sure he was a good guy the whole time. I just didn't know where he was going to end up. And it's really like, it's difficult to write a character like that.
Yeah.
And so they're not all going to be like that.
Yeah.
So maybe I'm being overly harsh in saying that that's a weakness.
Yeah.
Did you see anything else that you consider a weakness in the movie?
So I will say most of my things that are kind of weaknesses are mostly involved the first act of the movie. They really skip, like, hey, here there's some plutonium missing, and then all of a sudden they're showing up at a meet. And then they're like, hey, there's this Delbrook character, and all of a sudden they're showing up in a hospital having already captured Delbrook. They kind of speed through all of that through the first act. And I understand that's just to get you to the rest of the movie. But it did feel like that feels the choppiest part of the movie, is that those scenes right at the beginning. So it felt like you were jumping around quite a bit and you were just kind of having to catch up. When you get to the new scene, you have to catch up on where you are and how you got there.
Yeah.
A little bit too much. So I thought that was a little bit of a weakness. And I will go out on a limb and say, we can talk about this a little bit more, but I don't like the ending fight, the ending like helicopter crash fight in the cliff tops. I don't like it. It's my major thing I don't like about this movie. I want this to be my favorite Mission Impossible movie. I'm not sure if it is, because I don't like that. From the moment the helicopters crash to the death of Henry Cavill's character, I just don't like it. It feels to me like they pushed my suspension of disbelief a little too far. That they would be surviving these crazy helicopter crashes. Not to say, I mean, I would not go so far as to say it's a Fast and Furious scene, but it pushed my suspension of disbelief a little bit too far.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you on that.
So let's get forward to memorable scenes. What stood out to you? What were the memorable scenes in your mind?
So we've already mentioned Solomon Lane's character being a strength, and pretty much anytime Solomon Lane talks in both the movies is memorable to me. And I think especially when they're interrogating him in the room, and he basically just kind of repeats some of what Ethan had dreamt earlier at the beginning of the movie, and kind of makes him go into a flashback state immediately and terrified. There's real menace behind what he says and how he says it, and I just like that character.
Yeah.
Um, Beyond that, I did really like the fight scene in the beginning in the bathroom, just because I think that it's hard to choreograph something like that in such a small space.
And that was such a
And I think
brilliant fight
they,
sequence.
they did a good job at utilizing the location they were in
Yeah.
and using every inch of that space, including throwing people through some of the inches of that space.
Yes. It was fascinating. I listened to the director's commentary on this one. It's fascinating to listen to McQuarrie talk about how he shoots when the first time you appear in a scene, how he kind of gives you a 360 perspective so the audience understands the space. And you can see him doing that as they each walk around different sides of the bathroom, and they're giving you like a 360 view. So then the action sequence makes so much more sense to you. So really cool. We can go back and forth on these a little bit too. A lot of mine, as much as I'll talk about a couple of the bigger sequences, but so many of my memorable scenes are just moments in this movie. There are so many brilliant moments in it. Uh, the lighting right at the beginning when he's getting the book from the soldier out the door, and they're doing that quote where he says Ethan's the whole time they're going back and forth their passcodes. Ethan's face is in the dark, and then he says the line, "I am the storm," and immediately like he steps into the light and his face gets lit up, and that's the first time you see like a good profile of Ethan. Like that's a brilliant moment. Um, when I said it earlier, when the walls drop off of Delbrook's hotel or a hospital bed, and you see the whole thing was fake. That's a great mission moment. Uh, the Paris club sequence, and right when you were talking about the bathroom scene, the look on Ilsa's face when Ethan turns around and she sees it's him, amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Or then Henry Cavill's like he throws out the quote, "Hope is not a strategy," and Ilsa turns around, "Huh, you must be new here." Like
Yeah.
so good. The fact that I don't know if you caught this, but that the White Widow is actually Max from the first movie's daughter.
Hmm.
The arms dealer from the first movie, it's her daughter. She mentions it real briefly at the beginning of the scene, beginning of her appearance in the movie. Uh, there is there is another leg reveal on Vanessa Kirby when she pulls out the knife. So this is multiple movies where you've had like a substantial leg reveal from the female character, going back to Ilsa's gun scene and Maggie Q getting out of the car. That seems to be a common shot throughout these movies. Um, the clown car. I love the clown car, or even that scene where like the garage door opens and there's the cop there, and there's Luther holding a guy in a mask, a guy with a
Yeah.
bag over his head, and everyone just kind of standing around. Like it's such a
Walk
cool
away.
moment. Yeah,
Just walk away.
yeah,
Uh,
um,
yeah. Ilsa's interaction with Ethan, where you're like, why is she pointing a gun at him? Why is she shooting at him? What is happening?
yeah.
That whole sequence is pretty awesome. And actually, I really liked when they went to the garden and then they did like the sideways walk
Yeah.
from out open into the trees. I mean, they're still, I guess, out in public, but they're kind of in a
Mhm.
more secluded area. But that I thought just the way that was shot and how it was done was a great depiction of the nature of their relationship and the familiarity between them, but the confusion
Mhm.
as to what was happening. And I thought like they're walking in unison to the side like that was like all right, we're not completely separated, so let's figure this out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was a pretty cool metaphor the way
Yeah.
they filmed that.
That was a cool moment. I love how they just let that scene breathe. They didn't rush it. Um, and I know, man, I want to go into this one, but I don't. If an interest of time, I'm not going to. Uh, I love the whole running on the London rooftop scene. Like that whole scene is unbelievably well shot. The cinematography is just so cool as how they film him running. And what you need to understand about that sequence, everywhere that he is running, except for one half of one scene, he's running on a broken leg. the first part of that scene that they filmed, he jumps from one building to the next and he breaks his foot, and you can see him hobbling over there. And so they had to pause all the production of the movie for 5 to 6 weeks, and his leg like barely healed. And then all of that was running sequences the entire time. He's still on a semi-broken leg. But the two I want to focus on that were unbelievably crazy to do were the halo jump scene and the helicopter scene. The halo jump scene, unbelievable what they did for this one. They built the largest wind tunnel ever to rehearse it. And then they had to find somewhere to actually do this. So they went to the UAE because it was the only place that had the weather that they needed to do the multiple jumps to train. Tom Cruise had to be certified as a halo jump guy. Okay. And to do that, they did over 100 jumps out of a plane to both train for and film this scene. Tom Cruise had to do 100 jumps. And this was the schedule. Think about it. Listen to this. 5 jumps a day in the morning on a smaller plane. They did 5 jumps a day on a smaller plane. Then in the afternoon, they did 3 jumps on a larger C-17 from a higher altitude. And then in the evening, at twilight, they would do one shot that was an actual halo shot, and they had 3 minutes to film it in order to get the light correct. And Tom Cruise had to practice jumping out of a plane, and there was a cameraman who jumped right ahead of him, and he had to practice pausing 3 feet away from the camera, not 2.5 feet, not 3.5 feet. He had to land exactly 3 feet away from the camera in midair. So unbelievable. All the helmets they designed, they had to custom make those helmets and get them tested to work so that they would work for films. But just, I mean, once I saw what they did to film this, it was just like blew me away. And then the helicopter sequence, the flying helicopters. Tom Cruise had never flown a helicopter, so he went to Airbus and got trained as a helicopter pilot, and then had to train to do all these like crazy stunt maneuvers. And they've actually shot that in New Zealand. So he was acting, flying the helicopters, and working the cameras on his helicopter all at the same time. Just incredible stuff. I mean, what they did. I mean, how, like, he was in the morning, he was doing all these tests flying on helicopters. In the afternoon, he was filming. It's crazy the lengths he goes to make these shots work. So yeah. Just
what other actor would go, we need to do a helicopter scene, so I need to learn how to fly a helicopter.
He literally trained for 1.5 years to fly this helicopter. I mean, crazy stuff. I mean, who would do 100 jumps out of? He was doing 9 jumps a day to get the halo sequence.
Wow,
it's crazy. It's crazy stuff. Yeah. So just a few facts, fun facts and interesting tidbits. This movie was shot on film and digital, and the 2 main sequences, the halo jump and the helicopter sequences, were both done in actual IMAX cameras. This one was the 9th film in 10 years that Cruise and McQuarrie worked on together. That cliff climax, they actually went to Norway just to do that cliff climax. And that cliff was so remote that every single piece of equipment had to be flown up there by helicopter. So they had to build this like entire town. And then like the day after they got the shot, it snowed over for the entire winter, and they had to leave half their gear up there until the snow melted and they could come back for it. And Alec Baldwin's final words were actually recorded on his iPhone and sent to the director, and that was the audio that they used for that scene because they decided that he needed to say something later. So from like New Jersey or something. Alec Baldwin just filmed him saying this line into his iPhone. And the last thing I'll tell you, during the final action sequence when Benji and Ilsa and Lane are fighting, Rebecca Ferguson was 7 months pregnant.
Well, it's a good thing that they had someone trained to be a helicopter pilot to transport all the things up the cliff. So
all right, so let's close that'll do a wrap for our Mission Impossible Fallout review. Make sure you check out filmforfans.com where we've got I'm almost done with Ghost Protocols right up, and we'll get the rest of them up here soon. All right, quickly, what'd you watch this week?
Well, today, in lieu of going to the movies, I came home and had a family movie night, and I would like you to know that I saw the cinematic masterpiece known as High School Musical Part 1.
Oh man. Okay. Okay.
AKA the greatest showman in training, Zac Efron. Yeah, it's I mean, I can see why it succeeded as a teen movie. It was past my time, but my daughter is turning 13 next week. Great, that's awesome. But she loves this movie. I've watched it a couple times now, and it's not the worst thing I've ever seen. The music is really good. I was never a Disney original movie kid, even as a kid. So I've gotten an introduction to these movies through that. But yeah, High School Musical. If you have any teenagers, I'm sure they'll like it. It's a pretty decent movie. It's got good messages. I can't say that I wouldn't recommend it. So,
okay.
I also watched. What did I watch? I started to watch a movie called Solace with Anthony Hopkins.
Oh yeah,
and Jeffrey Dean.
Yeah.
On Netflix, but I'm only about a half an hour through that. I do plan on revisiting that and finishing that up sometime soon. And I did see Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse again. I've seen it 3 times now in the theater, and each time I have been more impressed than the last time. So there's just a lot to see in this movie, and this is why I like to rewatch movies, because it's given me time to kind of pick apart and focus on some more detail oriented things, and I've been more impressed with it each time I've seen it because of that. So all that being said, it is only 14 days until we see Oppenheimer, so nothing else really matters.
Yes, we got 2 big releases: Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning and Oppenheimer, and I am stoked for the next couple of weeks of movies. The ones I watched this week, I got to see Asteroid City, and I would say it was an interesting Wes Anderson feature. It was much more contemplative than most of the other Wes Anderson movies were. Like, there was a lot going on there philosophically and intellectually. I don't even think I came close to parsing all of his thoughts that he was pouring out into this movie. Yeah, I wouldn't say it was darker. Go ahead.
Yeah, it felt like it felt like there was more genuine, realistic human emotion in this movie than maybe any other one he has made.
Yeah.
And because of that, it was almost uncomfortable in some ways, because it felt very raw.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah,
I don't know how else to say it, but it was the most like raw emotionally movie I have seen him make.
And because it's like almost every single character was representing some sort of point of view, or had some sort of he was trying to say something through each one of those characters. And so trying to parse all that out in a movie that's typically Wes Anderson is really interesting. It's really fascinating. This is definitely one where multiple watches will be necessary, not because you don't understand the movie, but because there's so much there. There's so much meat there to pick up and to pick across. You just can't get it all in one pass. So
you dare me to jump out? You dare me to jump off the roof?
And then I saw Ghosted, the movie, the Apple TV Plus movie with Anna de Armas, and Chris Evans. Is that the right? Chris Captain America.
I think yes, that's right. Chris, yes.
Wait, is that the right Chris? Okay. It felt every bit of the B movie it was. Like everything was just like a little bit substandard. Like even their performances, like Chris Evans was better, but I've seen Anna de Armas in a number of things where I thought she was very believable. This one, not so much. Like, yeah, none of it was particularly well done. I mean, it's okay, but it is what it is. All righty. That will be it. That's the show. Make sure you visit filmforfans.com. Thanks for checking out the podcast. Tell your friends about it and all sorts of stuff like that. Until next time, enjoy the movies.